Election 2014 just around the corner, and that's why we're delighted to introduce our listeners to Ted Leddy. Ted, welcome to CouncilMatters.
Thanks very much, Mick. Glad to be here.
Ted, the banal details. Ted Leddy, Fine Gael, Castleknock. You're running for Fingal Council. We're going to try and do for the Twitter generation. Let's see if we can get in a quick. Who is Ted Leddy? So I've gone through a few. Ted, schools. What of these two words best sums you up? Fee paying or free to air, as we say?
Fee paying, I must confess.
Okay. Sport. GAA or rugby?
GAA.
Very good.
Although I did go to rugby school, I was the GA kid in the school.
That's fair enough. Booze, wine or beer?
I'm a beer man.
Okay. Here we go then, the toughie. Same-sex marriage or civil unions?
Same-sex marriage, but okay.
Okay, I have to say. Alright, moving along then. Economics. What do you favour? Tax hikes or public spending cuts?
Public spending cuts.
Okay, even better. News. Where do you get it from? Internet or TV?
Internet.
Fracking, yes or no?
Yes.
Okay. RTE. Should they licence fee or should they have to rely on ads?
Ads.
Moving along then again. John Waters and Miss Panty.
I have to say John Waters because I don't know who Miss Panty is.
Okay, fair enough. Last, but if there was a choice in public spending, who would you cut? Dole or pensioners?
Doyle.
Dole. Social welfare, unemployed or pensioners?
Dole.
Okay. And then last but by no means least, your colleague Noel Rock said if he's elected for Dublin City Council, he won't accept any expenses. What about yourself? Are you in the expenses camp or no expenses?
I honestly haven't looked into it that much, but I'm very, like when it comes to politicians' pay, I think the pay is legitimately high, but I think the expenses across the board are, I don't get them at all. I can't see myself claiming. I would be prepared to say no expenses.
Okay.
Even though I admit I haven't looked into it, I'm not kind of sure how much sort of travelling I'll be doing as a councillor. But
no, fair enough, Ted. I think we've given people there's certain categories there for everybody that they at least get a bit of an insight into who Ted Leddy is, rather than just the bloke who's running for Fine Gael out there in Castleknock. So why did you want to get into politics then, Ted?
I suppose, Mick, like I was just kind of one of those people from a young age. I was always fascinated in politics, you know. I came from a political family, not Fine Gael, mind you, but both my parents were from the north, and when I was a kid, we were always discussing the Northern Ireland problems around the table and all that. So from a very early age, even from the age of 10, I was kind of really into my politics, And I suppose it was just, some people are wired differently, By the time I was 17, 18, I knew I wanted to study it in college,
All right then. I'll put it to you, a controversial view I expound from time to time is that in Ireland we only do politics, that we have real problems doing government. And perhaps what we saw over the last 6 to 10 years says that. Politics plays too much of a role, I find, in this country. How do you feel about that?
Yeah, I think you're spot on. When I didn't join Fine Gael until I was in my mid-20s. I wasn't in it as a kid or anything. And I don't want to get too party political on it, but my view of what went wrong in the last 10 years was, too much of politics is about sort of examining the electorate, examining the population and trying to please as many sections of the electorate as you can to get elected, as opposed to putting the national interest first. Now, I'm a member of Fine Gael. Fine Gael aren't perfect, I know that. But, the reason I joined them and the reason I'm proud to be a member is, there is this sort of sense that, you always put the national interest first. And it's not about your own popularity, and it's not about trying to sort of, win people over. It's about what's trying to do right by the national interest,
So would you say that one of the major flaws that the previous regime were guilty of was buying elections?
Exactly, that's the exact phrase I'd use. It was about literally buying off the electorate with treats, and I really, I despise that type of politics. If I can give you even a small example from my own area.
Please do.
I'm running in Castleknock now. The constituency is Dublin West. Our local TD, or our local Fine Gael TD, is Leo Varadkar, okay? Leo's the Minister of Transport. A couple of years ago, there was a proposal to build the Metro West out to Castleknock and Blanchardstown. And Leo looked at it, came to the conclusion that we didn't have the finance for it and couldn't sustain it. Okay, so he didn't build it. Now he's been mercilessly criticised by the Fianna Fáil reps in particular for not building it. But the truth is, you don't build things you can't afford just to get people on your side. And consider that He's the Minister for Transport and he's a TD for Dublin West. So it would have been very good for him personally if he had done with it.
Sure.
If you had gone with it. But, you know, the right attitude to have is it sustainable? Can it be maintained? You know, and, you know, put the national interest first, not, you know, like you said, buying voters.
Sure. In that regard then, I mean, I asked Francis Timmins, who's running as an independent in South Dublin last week, did we think the real fallout, which we're now still experiencing, was it structural or was it cultural? Or where do you? I mean, it was probably a bit of both. But where do you think the real responsibility lies?
Well, I think it's more cultural, and I'm in favour of political reform. Everybody is, but I have to say this: I do think sometimes reform of the system is a bit of an excuse to let politicians off the hook.
Sure.
Like, obviously, we need political reform. You know, we need legislation to be better scrutinised. We need more powers devolved to local authorities, which I'm glad is being done. But the system isn't, you know, I mean, there's no such thing as an idiot-proof political system, is what I'm saying. The Irish political system, it has its flaws, but, you know, we are in our 10th decade of democracy here. We didn't get everything wrong, do you know what I mean? And sometimes when I think people say, the system's broken, you know, it kind of lets politicians off the hook. It wasn't us, it was the system. You know, if you have bad politicians, it's going to fail no matter how good the political system is, you know?
Okay. I want to put something to you that you might consider controversial, and that is that what role, Fine Gael were in opposition. I'm not going to get into the Labour Party. Fine Gael were in opposition during that Celtic Tiger phase. They're not mugs, they know what's going on in the economy. Do you think Fine Gael bear any responsibility, even for staying silent during what went on? Do you think they might have stayed perhaps too silent for too long?
Yeah, like I can't deny that. I mean, there is, you know, it's very hard to oppose the politics of populism. Do you know what I mean? And maybe Fine Gael fell into that trap to some extent. Having said that, there's a bit of a Fianna Fáil talking point out there that, you know, Fine Gael wanted more spending. No, they didn't. I mean, they might have wanted more spending in different areas or targeted in a different way, but we certainly didn't want more deregulation of the financial sector. We certainly didn't want more, you know, reckless spending. So I think, you know, there is a bit of a, you know, Michael McDowell is a great man for saying that, and so are some former Fianna Fáil ministers. And I think, to be honest, it's a way of sort of getting them off the hook. Like, I can't prove this, obviously, but I do think if Fine Gael were in power from, let's say, 2000 on, we wouldn't have had an economic model, a bogus economic model that was about taking in so much taxes from just one sector of the economy. Like I said, until I get my time machine, I can't prove that. But you know, that's my sort of impressions.
Sure. The other, I mean, people talk about a cultural failure, and the cultural failure I put to people is that we had all the tools in place, so we had all the brakes in place to stop the runaway train, but for whatever reason, the regulator, who is empowered to act on our behalf, didn't happen. Now, again, people will say that's cultural because they went to same schools and they went to the same rugby clubs and they went to or whatever. I'm not going to knock a certain class. Is that a problem in a country like this? Is that we tended to get better results when we brought in foreigners? Is that something we need to look at in terms of overall reform?
Well, no. Like, I've always thought there's a very definite connection between, you know, the light touch regulation that you mentioned and the culture of populism, as we said. There's a culture between that and releasing all this cheap credit. Do you know what I mean? And to me, those two things are definitely married. You know.
But isn't that unfortunately what we have to say is that that's a factor of the financial markets these days? Is that really did Charlie McCreevy have the power to stop AIB going out there and buying these bonds left, right, and centre? I mean. And they are getting in all this credit and then issuing bonds. In essence, didn't these guys know that in the final analysis we were going to underwrite it? That was the big gamble that they took and perhaps even got away with.
I suppose, like politicians, like even myself, I'm an aspiring politician. I'm a pro-business politician, okay, and I want to be able to sort of demonstrate that. I think sometimes you get a sort of an atmosphere when people in the business community say to politicians, sort of, prove you're one of us. Well, I'm pro-business, but I don't believe in letting the financial sector away with whatever they want. Do you know what I mean? Yeah. You know, I'm not one of these people who believes if you deregulate, everything will just fall into place. Do you know what I mean?
What does that actually mean in terms of, you know, particularly for the electorate? Most people would interpret pro-business as anti-labour. Now, again, that's probably a naive view, and it's possibly even a biased view. How do you see pro-business? How would you define that?
Well, first of all, I don't see it as anti-labour. I want people to be well paid. If people are, I worked in business. If people in the wider community are well paid, they spend and circulate money in the economy. So I'm certainly not anti-labour. But in terms of pro-business, particularly now, most people, Mick, aren't really fully aware of the extent of the local government reform, which has devolved a lot of powers, enterprise, tax functions down to the local authorities. So for the first time ever, county councillors really are in quite a unique position where they can, help stimulate the local economy. Okay. I'm a big believer in small business. As I think the Taoiseach said before, there's about 200,000 small businesses in the country. If every one of them created maybe one extra job, that'd be a huge, huge dent in the unemployment crisis. And even in my own ward, which is Castleknock, Blanchardstown, Carpenterstown, there's about 200 small businesses, and I'm not including the Blanchardstown Centre and the larger corporations. If as a councillor I was in a position, or I succeeded in sort of triggering activity within the local economy that resulted in a lot of small businesses expanding, and maybe hiring one or two more people, I would be delighted with that.
Okay, where do you think then the opportunities arise? Particularly, let's stick at Fingal, because Fingal as an area really wasn't there much when I was growing up. To me, the demographic of Fingal is quite unusual in one sense. At either end, you've got quite wealthy areas. You've got Castleknock and you've got Howth, and then you've got the emerging middle classes who are probably caught in that negative equity. Where are the emerging opportunities do you see? Is there particular industries you think, whether it's multinational or is there an advantage that Fingal has that might be worth encouraging in that regard then, Ted?
Well, as you said, it is such a broad area. It covers all sectors in terms of the economy, even agriculture, believe it or not. But the recession.
The Garden of Dublin for the breadbasket of Dublin for a very long time. Yeah.
The recession was so brutal and so all encompassing. The recovery has to be the same. It's like a war. It has to be fought on many different fronts. Yeah. So there's no. I actually have a lot of interest in sort of agricultural issues, but obviously, like where I am, Castleknock and Blanchardstown, there's a lot of multinational corporations down in Blanchardstown. That's to be encouraged. I believe there was some good news this morning at 10 o'clock. Maybe it's not on the news yet, but we'll hear it later today. But I have a particular interest myself in small business, because I really believe that small business, those that hire between 2 and let's say 15 to 20 people.
Okay, what sectors are we talking? Are we talking comms? Are we talking manufacturing? Are we talking service industries?
I'd say mainly service industry. Manufacturing, let's face it, is although you wouldn't know. I mean, with new technology, you wouldn't know what we might end up manufacturing in this country. But it's mainly the service industry. Okay. Like I worked in the rag trade for quite a while. Okay, in the clothing industry, and part of my job was sort of selling to retailers all over the country. And it became very clear to me, I mean, this was in the middle of the recession, 2009, 2010, it became very clear to me that the towns across the country that were handling the recession a little bit better were towns where the local authorities were basically on the side of were on the side of the local business community. And some politicians and councils, let's face it, are a little bit hostile to business, So it really became clear to me, some towns were just handling it better, and others were not. So that's what I want to be. I want to be on the side of the retailer, on the side of the small business. Look, I'm interested in business. I wouldn't start one up now. It's just too expensive. Do you know what I mean? It's so difficult. You have to be doing really, really serious figures to justify it. And if we can help cut those costs, help make business more productive, they'll expand. I mean, I've spoken with many people in Castleknock and Blanchardstown who are doing viable businesses, and they'd like to expand and they want to, but they just can't because it's sort of too expensive. So sure. If I could work with Fingal County Council to sort of bring some of those costs down, like I said, get on the side of the small business, I really believe it could result in a lot of them expanding.
Yeah. Traditionally in this country, when we've had a downturn and then we decide to boost unemployment, the sectors really weren't there when I was a kid in that sense of the word. So either we ended up with mass emigration, which which was the safety valve from time to time, or then when we wanted to pump up the economy again, we create a whole stack of public service positions. Is that something you would not favour this time around? Do you think we have to go through? We've gone through a certain amount of pain that it would be silly now to say, "Oh, we'll leave off the roughage and we go back to the cream cakes."
Well, I'm very much against creating sort of fake jobs. If that's the kind of without maybe fake is the wrong word, but if that's kind of what you're getting at. But again, like the public service and the private sector, they really should complement each other in an economy. Do you know what I mean? Obviously there is a lot of inefficiency and waste, and I think Brennan Howlin has been quite good about grabbing the bull by the horns there. But I would be against that. I would be against sort of a lazy-minded kind of a public investment to sort of get jobs going. Now I'm in favour of a stimulus, but I'm not in favour of kind of reckless spending. If you stimulate in a very sort of a targeted way to target certain sectors of the economy, like that's wise. But I do understand, frankly, if some of the hard left parties were in power, that's what they do. They put up a load of projects. They wouldn't really achieve very much. They'd be very expensive, and in the end, the whole thing would sort of implode.
Sure. Something that I think is clear to a great deal of people in the know, that the real ticking time bomb there, and it has been for some time now, is youth unemployment. How serious you're in part of that, what I call the 29 to 35 generation. How serious do you think that issue is, and what sort of feedback are you getting from people of your own generation, particularly those who are having trouble getting employment?
Yeah, it's obviously it's an enormous problem, and it's not just unemployment; it's underemployment. Like I'm lucky in that, like, my own personal kind of sort of group of friends are all working, but all of them are sort of underemployed or sort of qualified in better areas and so on. It's a real problem, and like the national strategy of economic recovery, that's what's going to sort of generate revenue, and that's what's going to generate resources and so on. So in terms of youth unemployment, I'm a big believer in sort of the national strategy of sort of putting the national interest first, and youth unemployment is, we've got to do a lot of investment in particularly sort of new technologies, new industries, new media, that type of thing.
Okay, something that is one of my pet bugbears is the education system, whether it's the practical side of it like FOSS, or whether it's even the third level side of it. How well do you think that has served young people today? Have a lot of people been encouraged to go into what I will call vanity courses that haven't really got much chance of really ever turning into a career? Do you think that that has been a problem, and do you think it's something that needs to be addressed, if you do think it is? Yeah,
well, it's a fair point. I mean, even it's occurred to me even in my own life. I mean, I studied politics and history in college, which I loved and was great, but in terms of I didn't just come out of college and go, hey, hire me. I mean, I know there's a lot of arts degrees and things like that. People often go into teaching and so on after that. But I think it's more of a personal decision. I don't think it's something that the government has to sort of we all need our own path. I don't think it's sort of something that has to happen that requires government intervention.
Well, we do put restrictions on the number of people who get into medical school. We do that a certain way by doing it on points or whatever. But my particular bugbear is media. There are 8 times more media students in Ireland than there are media jobs, short of everybody becoming an entrepreneur. I see in this world the number of people who are just about to graduate, and at that stage the reality is kicking in that have I spent 3 years following a hobby, or is there going to be a career? Most of them, it's not going to be a career, and I just wonder about the wisdom of pursuing policies like that.
Sure, yeah. Well, I suppose in terms of the education system and making it match supply and demand, that is very difficult to do, because supply and demand in itself changes, and the nature of the economy changes so often. Again, I know a lot of people who studied something and it turned out not to be very practical. Again, I would always offer sort of solid advice, and people need good advice maybe from the Department of Education and so on. But it's not something that you can really, I mean, for education in itself means different things to different people. Sure, yeah. For everybody, it's not about necessarily getting a job,
I agree. Okay, local government reform. This is something you're very, very keen on. What is top of the agenda there for you?
For me, it's kind of a little bit hard to go into details here, because a lot of the issues are still being ironed out.
Okay. Yeah.
But for me, it's about sort of using the resources of the local authorities, the property tax and so on, to make sure it's spent in a very efficient way, and to make sure people can see it in a kind of a tangible way, that it's used wisely, and particularly that it's used to sort of stimulate the local economy.
Yeah. Let's get back to some of the issues we've had that were prominent in the Fingal area. The the pipeline? How do you does that even come into your area there?
No, not really. It doesn't affect us. I haven't really read up on it very much, to be honest.
Okay. Water. Irish water. Where do you come down on that one? I mean, there's been a lot of, I think, nonsense and talked about it that, we focused on the cost. Out in your part of the world, is water supply an issue? Is water quality an issue, or are people going to buy into the water meters or the water price rather than water value argument?
Sure. Well, I'm trying to make that argument too. I mean, like when I decided to get involved in local politics, and I found out that water was being transferred away from the councils, I was delighted, because I was very aware that it wasn't ran very efficiently. There was a lot of waste. And I thought the idea of it being run by Irish Water was fantastic. Now, obviously, the news in the last couple of weeks about the cost of it, like I had the same thought as everybody else when I heard the cost of it. But in fairness, like it does remain to be seen whether or not it's money well spent. We do know that it was very, very badly spent before. It cost 1.2 billion a year across 34 local authorities. It certainly wasn't a success. So, like I said, it remains to be seen about whether this is a good move or not.
Okay. Last but by no means least, Ted, because we're going to go over to Colin in a second. Arts. I mean, you've got a fabulous place out there in Blanchardstown, in that part. There's another one in Swords. These aren't cheap places to run. By and large, if you're living in my part of the world, it has to be something really good to go out there. Do you think that should be given over to private enterprise, or do you think that is the primary role for a council to be involved in as well, to be supporting arts like that?
Sure. Well, I mean, as long as the council is financially healthy, I don't see why not. Mm-hmm. I mean, if it goes privately, you're sort of talking about philanthropy. Is that what you mean? Is it?
Well, we're running for a profit.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
Well, I have no problem with the sort of cultural aspect to Fingal County Council. Mm-hmm.
And I am hoping that messy Mondays aren't an issue out there in Castleknock. I would imagine it's not anyway.
No. Well, I don't think there's any place open late on a Monday. So.
So you're running in, as I say, you're going for election for Fingal Council, 23rd of May. Ted Leddy, we wish you the very best, and hopefully the voters of Castleknock will turn out and support you in droves.
I appreciate that, Nick. Thanks a lot.
Thank you for your time today.
Thank you. You're welcome.